Yeah, so today my talk's going to be probably a little bit different, but I'm going to talk about how we've gone to deliver services, not automation, in some of the projects we've been doing. And it's about properly defining what you give to your customers via network automation and how that empowers you to build and scale that automation. So what am I talking about with the defined service? Well, I think that starts with you asking yourself a bunch of questions. And when you're doing these network automation projects, can you actually define what you're delivering to the organization? Sometimes when we're doing automation, we get lost in a little rabbit hole. We build things that help ourselves. We don't actually add value to the rest of the organization, and we get lost on that. And that comes into what the return of investment is. So if someone's spending money on your network automation team, what are you giving back to the business? What savings do you achieve? What other teams that are dependent on networks in the business, what do they get out of it? And that leads into saying, have you identified who your customer is? So sometimes in networks, the customer is other people from the networks team, or traditionally it may have been, or it might be a network architect or some sort of front door where customer request comes through. But do you actually know who the customer is, who the project team that's waiting on that is? And the last one is identifying the actual problem itself. And one of the things we also tend to do with automation is fix the problem with the loudest noise, or the problem we really know about now, but we don't think about how many times that's going to be requested in the next year or the next 2 years, or is this just a one-off? Should I spend like an inordinate amount of time on it, or should I just do it as a fast thing? So that kind of leads you to say, look again at who is your customer. So what I was leading to before is when your customer traditionally may be another team, try and think bigger. If you're just helping the network team, can you actually move that further and further forward to the application developers, the people who are actually building stuff for the business and need that network resources stood up, or that piece of infrastructure? And what you want to try and do is deliver that value direct to those customers, not intrinsically. So this diagram that I put together here is a typical service request. You know, in big organizations, you'll have multiple options. You have ServiceNow, Confluence, Jira, some Git, whatever. That might go to the networks team, but then they might ask the platform or security team for something. So you've got a ticket on a ticket. Or you might go to the security team and they ask the networks team. So if you're the networks team in this scenario and you automate your stuff and it's super fast, it doesn't matter, because it's only as fast as the stacked serialized tickets that you need to handle. So if you don't address that problem, what ends up happening is these customers just think that service is bad. It doesn't matter if you've got the best technology in the world and your network team's performing great. So that's where you want to start. Drag it across as much as you can. And so how this is done is to define a service, and define a service in terms of a piece of infrastructure or a thing that the customer requests from your team in a way that they can consume and you can deliver in a consistent manner. How you do this is to abstract the complexity. So one of the things that, in the evolution of network automation, people say, all right, well, we're going to do Terraform. So we'll give our customers access to Terraform, and any customer can go in and they can add, in the Terraform repo, and we'll go off and deploy it. That doesn't scale, because when you're talking about a developer team customer or someone way down the other side of the business, they don't really know what Terraform is. They don't want to learn it. You want to reduce the cognitive load that you're putting on those other teams. And so what we want to get to is some clearly defined service that we can offer in YAML direct to those customers that has the minimum information we need to deliver the service. And minimum information is important. We don't want to ask people, as what normally happens with Terraform or JSON config is all the options and the defaults will be there. We don't want to ask that to the customer. We want to instead deliver the easy path. So again, what makes your automation job easier is to strictly define that service and get good at delivering that service, not build things for the exception cases that invariably come. And that's another thing we do traditionally in networks. One of the things that we've seen in the past is you'll have a way of delivering something. Let's say it's a cross-site data center load balancer, and then a customer will say, I only want to use one data center. Now, traditionally, we'd just go and configure the one data center. But when you're delivering set services, you would say, that's not part of this service, request something else, or do the exception path. And that's where you can create a hard or slower non-automated path. And so the important part of this is to spend your time and invest in actually defining that. So before you start automating or while you start automating, spend a lot of time defining what you're actually delivering and what you need to ask the customer. And a lot of what my job now today is when we're trying to get to that, I spend a lot of time asking people, do we need to ask the customer that? Why are we asking the customer that? And when people can't give a good answer, you say, well, let's not ask it. What's the point in asking the customer something that we're only using 1% of the time? And then finally, once you've got something structured like that, you can then validate it. And that's really important because you can validate it right at the customer request level instead of way down the end. And if you can't validate something quickly, when it gets validated, just as you're going to deploy it to the network, you then have to fail that all the way back to the customer. And that's when these 3, 4, 5-day delays happen in big organizations, and what annoys everyone. So the other things this gives you is it gives you really good requirement specification and clear deliverables. And the second point there is that helps to engage your developer teams. So we talked a bit about network engineers, software developers, people moving between it. The way to get good network or software or people on board is give them something very well specified and with good requirements, because that makes your development life a lot easier. When you give something very vague, especially junior network automation engineers, they're going to get frustrated quickly because they don't have a set thing that they're going to give the customer. The other thing is you get a really easy return on investment calculation. You say, we're going to deliver this service. It used to take this long. It used to take 5 tickets. The average of those 5 tickets was 20 engineer hours. Now every time we automate the delivery of that service, we're now saving that. And in one of our projects, we actually built a counter that counted up the money savings versus the old project or the old process, which was very good when talked about budgets before. That helps that. And along those lines, as you get the stakeholders really involved then, because they can see what you're delivering, they can see what it saves, and they can measure the progress of it. And that all leads to scale. Once you can measure something, once you can put it on the dashboard, once you can get those upper level management people involved, then you can really start to get the ball rolling. And some of those exception cases I talked about before may become a new service. But you now know how much you need to spend to do that and how much it's going to deliver to the business. So an example, we've been working with a large bank, and the bank had defined patterns, and they'll define infrastructure patterns. So basically they said, if you're an app developer in the bank and you wanted to do a tier 1 application facing internal, you would need a load balancer in each data center, GTM for DNS load balancing, you need firewalls, you need ASM policies, certificates, whatever. So there's a number of set patterns like that. And when we started, they were just written out as pattern designs. So we said, and we picked the easy one, and we said, all right, we're going to build just a little microservice. We'll have a Git repo that does some declarative stuff, and we'll use Ansible to push that. And then we said, well, how can we offer this to the rest of the bank? And one of the engineering teams said, oh, we have a web CLI app that people use to deploy applications. So first we said, all right, let's just get the CLI app to call our little microservice, we'll configure Git, and then we'll push it. And that got the service out there to the customer base very, very early. And there's nothing perfect about that system, right? So it's not super scalable, but we got it running. And early on, we were configuring sort of bit of load balance, a bit of DNS, that kind of thing. Then it evolved, and another team said, oh, we've got a huge Git repo, it does other things, but we have heaps of customers going into it, so we're just going to get them to put a bit of YAML in our huge Git repo, and we'll have a CI/CD process that will go off and call your little microservice. So they did that, and then we started to get more and more through, and we started to deliver more patterns. We started to have to sort out the change part, the CMDB, but again, not the best interface that was coming in, but we were constantly proving the value and the delivery of that service and building that use case as we went along. And then, as it is now, our product NetOrc is in there to allow customers to have their own infrastructure Git repositories, and we're delivering over 15 services direct to those customers now. But it's evolved throughout time to become something that's now scalable and had the business case build it up as we went along. And yeah, we're doing a bunch of stuff now. So far in total, that project has delivered over 14,000 patents to customers. And these are patents, everything from just a GTM and a DNS record to certs, load balancers, certificates, firewall rules, everything you can think of. And you're going back to the dashboard, each one of those patents has quite a significant engineer time saving against it. But in addition to that, we can actually prove that that has a project time saving, because once things are patternized and delivered as services, it becomes easier for the projects to then find them and request them. So you reduce the delay there. And currently with NetOrc, we've done 3,000 patents in the last 5 months. The major revolution we've done there is start to do full lifecycle management of the patents. So by supporting customer individual Git repositories, we can support modification, deletion, CMDB style services of that, and we can more rapidly deliver patents. And yeah, the full lifecycle ownership of that. So we're getting about 1,000 requests a month through that right now. So with anything, and I think the first one was mentioned earlier, you have a lot of challenges to doing this. And if onlys was mentioned in the keynote. There's a lot of people who say, oh, well, you can't deliver a customer service because we don't have everything automated. So if only the patent team had their automation done, we could deliver a customer service. Or if only we had one single system for customers to request it, we could deliver automation. Now we kind of proved that you don't need the right system. You can get it out there, you can prove the use case, and you can scale from there. The other part is that not everything can or has to be automated. And a really good point of this was I had CMDB on the last slide. So one of our patents that we delivered required a CMDB entry to be updated. And the ServiceNow team wouldn't allow us to use the API. So what did we do? We just got an intern and we spat out a CSV file of all the CMDB entries that were requested that day. And the intern went and did the CSV upload onto Snow or to ServiceNow every day. Now we still delivered the services, we still created the value. Wasn't automated, but the bulk of it was. And we didn't pause things. So yeah, from that, automation is a concept. It's what we're really striving for is faster, clearer delivery, higher value, higher quality, and that value delivered to the customer base. So selling the solution early on is something that, as engineers, we don't talk ourselves up. We don't really think about that. But it's a really important part of these projects. When you define something, can you then sell that? Can you sell the benefits? Can you articulate the benefits as you're starting the project? And then the final challenge is cutting out the noise. So there's always someone who will say, in 5 years, we're going to have, and they'll always say that, It'll never really happen if you've been in any organizations longer than 5 years. Most people know that. So that detractor's always there. So when you're delivering services to customers, you kind of have to act like a startup as well. So you need to stretch more into that customer base and say, well, can you engage them and get feedback? You know, we've done things with the customers with net promoter scores, which is something that's really startup-y and, you know, really within the ServiceNow domain. But if you go and engage with the customer and say, do you like this service that we're delivering you? Do you have any feedback? That'll really start to build your development backlog. And that's when you can really engage software developers to say, hey, we've got a bunch of requests from customers, they're engaged, they're giving us feedback, let's spin the wheels and get this loop going. One of the things you can also do is, once you've got this working, it's really easy to identify the next service that you should deliver. So when you set the standard, you build up that customer feedback loop, the customer use of the automation, and they will start to tell you what's coming up. They'll start to say, hey, we've got a huge project, we want to request all these things next month, you should do this one next. And you can then use this information to go to your senior management and say, here's all the services we deliver. You know, customer Y is asking for a new one. We think that's really valuable. Or one of these other services, we could make it faster. So you should invest here or here. And you can really start to identify that to the senior stakeholders. So yeah, mine was a lightning talk. So I'm going to leave everyone with a challenge, and I hope everyone thinks about this. But it's really about selling what you're doing in an organization. So if the CEO of the organization or the customer you work for came to you and said, pitch me on network automation, what are you actually giving me? Can you answer that? Because I think if it was me 5 or 6 years ago, I would have been saying, oh, I write some great scripts to configure a bunch of devices and it saves me a lot of time. But now I would be saying, all right, well, we've defined our deliverable, we've taken it all the way to your app teams, your developers, who are directly impacting your revenue. We're making those projects run faster, and we, you know, have the ability to scale that out to further see those benefits. So yeah, I think about the value of what you're doing, and yeah, when you're in the weeds, when you're testing things, when you're deciding how to design things, it's a good way to step back and see it from there. So yeah, that's my contact details. And any questions before I finish, if we've got time?
Thank you very much. I'm here. Sure. Hi. Yeah, so in the end, you were saying that the way you sell it to the senior management, one of the two possible pitches is either to do more or deliver what we have faster. However, in the enterprises, right, so when network is not part of the core business, network is a support function, right? So the pitch that just my network will be stable, right? It's not about the delivery, it's about the stability, because network is not so frequently like a major bottleneck for the product delivery. They are up there in the value chain. So network being more stable, do you think it's a good pitch for enterprise? Yeah, for the automation?
I think that pitch comes in parallel, because if you've freed up resources by delivering automated services, you can then say, all right, this freed resource we can put into the stability of the network. And one of the things that stops automated services a lot is your network's not stable. So for example, we've done things with BigIQ where we're sending declarations to it, and the declarations would sometimes fail because the F5 network is so big. So we still delivered the service, but we'd have someone sitting there syncing devices to make sure it went through. So once we've established that, we'd say, all right, instead of offering a new service or doing more network automation, we'll spend time into fixing that big IQ bug and making sure that every time we send something, it's stable and delivered consistently. So I think, yeah, it's about establishing that framework, and then you can pick and choose where you might do stuff. The flip side of that is they may have decided that, we're not using F5 anymore, so don't spend any money on that. Let's move it all to the new thing. Is that answer you all right? Yep.
Yeah, you mentioned abstract complexity in your slides. I think that has to do with the data complexity and the amount of data we need to process to make those end services. So how did you tackle these complexities?
I think, yeah, it's learning to say no a little bit with the abstraction and creating those hard paths. So not necessarily trying to deliver a service that will do everything for everyone, analyzing what actually comes through the network team and building services that deliver, I talk about the 80-20 rule or that kind of thing. Build a service that delivers that, and then you can minimize the complexity. And you can still have an option to have the super complex service. That's where something like a network's front door would exist, where your network's architects would be the ones that take those complex requests, all that data, all those custom configurations, and they spend more time on that, but they don't spend the time on the easy path ones.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the service lifecycle part. So in general or in overall, how you can manage the service lifecycle part like modification, creation, or deletion?
Yeah, so one of the things we've done by connecting it to the customer Git repo is through NetOrca was we base it on a JSON schema to define the service. So that schema can be versioned and upgraded. And having a connection direct to the customer source of truth, we don't like to say that today, allows you to give feedback to them to say they need to update or they need to add a field or that service is being decommissioned. So having a customer source of truth or a way that they actively monitor it helps with the service lifecycle, and it takes it away from ticketing, because ticketing is very hard to do a service lifecycle. You get a request in 2 years ago, you update the service to do a different schema, and you have no way of feeding back to the customer. Maybe you can find out their details, but they've normally left the organization. So yeah, having that customer connection, I think, gives you the ability to update schemas and services that you offer.
One of our biggest challenges when shipping left.
It's off. Your mic is off.
One, two, three. Oh yeah. One of our biggest challenges when shifting left to developers was IT security. So how have you dealt with things like change management and IT security when they basically don't trust you as a network engineer to deploy changes? How are they going to trust developers to do it for you?
Yeah, so when we have the request from the developers in their own Git, it is decoupled from the infrastructure push, and networks is still responsible for the infrastructure push itself. And it goes into a lot of it. The minimum complexity means we're only offering a very tight service, which is a thing that's pre-approved from security. So that's how we were able to manage the, offering that. Part of defining a service is getting security to agree to that. So the easy path is the security agreed path. Then the change, the actual infrastructure push is owned by the service owner, which in our case is the network team. So they're the ones that raise the change records. So the customers do a request into a queue effectively, but the infrastructure providers raise a change record, and then they're eventually responsible for the push. And this is a bit of a mindset shift, because I think making developers responsible for a change on the network is a bit silly, because they have nothing to do with that. So networks then is responsible for the change. But in order to do that, you have to give that well-specified, service to your customers. So it all brings in together to allow you to do that, and that's where the scale comes from.
We have time for a couple more.
Any more? Oh, over there. Yep, that way. taking everyone away from beers. Yeah.
So you said you need to define the deliverable with the customers, but what you do when your customer doesn't really know what he wants, except I want network automation, apart of maybe annoying them with question daily?
I think that comes in the service definition because it comes back to another thing that was mentioned earlier was network design, so design for automation. As you design a network that is automatable, you should also be tunneling your customers down a way of doing things. And that, in the fact of doing that, allows you to define a service. So it's not about delivering something to the customer who's making the most noise, potentially, because that's another trap to get in. You know, with banks, you have the trading team that's always asking for all this customer stuff. So it's properly defining something, working with those customers to actually give them a service they want, but not getting sidetracked with all their minor requests and all that kind of thing. It is kind of creating a business case, which is where the time needs to be spent, and you end up negotiating with a lot of people. But the end result of that is everyone ends up pretty happy at the end. One more, up the back. It's off.
Yes. Okay. If application developers nowadays create an application, it needs to be cloud native, right? Which has its basic principles, requirements to create a scalable next generation application. What you created here is also combining all the pieces together. It's quite an application, right, with different modules that you need or sub-applications. Do you also obey let's say, what application developers use for cloud-native application development, like microservices or function code as a function instead of VMs?
Yeah, I suppose what we're delivering now is patterns that sit on top of those microservices. So it's, you know, the examples I used were for internal infrastructure, so the internal cloud. Whereas, you know, if they were using AWS, all of that stuff could be done in their own namespace or their own instance via Terraform or whatever they wanted to use. But it's also creating an abstraction for that. So when you set standards, you can abstract them out to the customer to make them follow that, you know, there needs to be a load balancer, there needs to be 2 microservices behind it, they need to be spread across data centers. So we're not telling the application developers, I guess, how they should deploy. We kind of are. We kind of are telling them and roving them into doing what they do. There's a current challenge with moving to cloud, which I think is a dangerous thing. There's another rant I'll go on. But giving application developers free rein to cloud networking principles is something that we'll all be cleaning up in 10 years, possibly. So, yeah, a complicated answer, but I think it's on top of the microservices, I guess.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.